Former public protector and Stellenbosch University Law Trust Research Chair, Professor Thuli Madonsela, is cautioning the ANC against appeasing investors. She's calling for the party to prioritize the constitutional integrity and welfare of the country after it announced that it will seek a government of national unity. The ANC slumped to just over 40% of the national vote during last month's elections. Madonsela joins us now for more on this. Prof, a very good evening to you and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo. What a privilege to talk to you again after a long time. And good evening to the viewers.
Well, it's been interesting how political parties characterize and interpret, the results of the election. I mean, you have an ANC that says a message has been sent to it by the voters. They want them to work with everyone. And then you have other parties that say, if anything, this election has been a rejection of the ANC, and then you have another group of parties saying, oh, well, black parties need to work together. Should we put a lot of emphasis on these blocks' interpretation of the outcome?
Well, statistics can be interpreted by anybody, anyhow. That's what I learned in my statistics course. The truth, though, is most of the voters chose the ANC, but not as a majority party this time, as the party with the most votes, as a single party at 40%. Nobody, either to the left or to the right, has more votes than the ANC. How I interpret it is the voters, some of the voters are interested in market-inclined policies. That would be those to the right, who are most likely to vote for the DA. And some of the voters are looking for additional change, some even more extreme change, that is those who voted the EFF and the MK party. Other voters want moderate but very measured change. Those are the 40% that voted for the ANC. How I interpret it then is that voters need more change, but they don't want us to only listen to the markets. Voters also don't want state capture.
Now, you are cautioning, following, of course, the ANC's decision to go for a government of national unity. You're saying they shouldn't seek a coalition partner based solely on how investor-friendly it is, after all. And I was speaking to an analyst on Friday, asking them whether there is, in fact, policy-wise, a huge difference between the ANC and the DA, and he reckoned not really.
Well, that depends on how that person interprets the policies of the DA. The DA is on record as saying affirmative action is discrimination. That is an American approach, a right-wing American approach. It is not a global approach. It's not a UN approach. It's not a Canadian approach. And it's certainly at odds with our own constitution, because Section 9.2 of the Constitution is very clear that equality includes equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms, and to achieve equality, which means we don't have it yet, special measures of the nature of legislation and other measures may be taken to advance those who were discriminated by unfair discrimination. So that said, therefore, the DA, to the extent that it says affirmative action is discrimination, is at odds with the Constitution, it's also at odds with the Constitution by rejecting social assistance or social security. As Mahlangu versus Minister of Labour says, the Constitution enjoins government to ensure that everyone gets a basic level of support so that they can enjoy basic livelihoods. That was Mahlangu versus Minister of Labour. But something interesting that Mahlangu versus Minister of Labour said was that social assistance in the context of South Africa is also restitutive. Because if you think about it, Vuyo, the majority of people who can't afford livelihoods today are victims of that pyramid scheme. that was created from colonialism to apartheid through land dispossession, through commercial rights being denied. But it wasn't just rights denied. People often say people were denied land. No, land was taken away. Businesses were taken away. Premises were taken. People's homes were taken away. Today, people get given land only back, but not the money they lost by not being able to till that land, not the homes they lost when their land was taken away. And therefore, those who are suffering today, being unable to look after themselves, are predominantly Black people. And that's a discrepancy between the DA and the ANC. And I must say, Vuyo, the ANC is closer to the Constitution. On student support, NSFAS, currently people are supported fully if the parents earn or they themselves earn less than 360,000. The DA wants to halve that for full support. And that would increase the missing middle. As I'm speaking to you, we do everything to support students. I personally, together with sometimes some people supporting me, I'm supporting 7 students who wouldn't have registered this year if I hadn't, with my family, stepped up to support them together with colleagues. And we will be marching on June 16 for that. If the DA gets its way, that would mean there would be more people in that category. So there is a gap between the ANC and the DA, but in the broader constitutional architecture, the DA is close to the ANC. The ANC is close to the EFF on some things as well. So I wouldn't say that the ANC is closer to the DA than it is to the EFF. It's just a question of differences on what part of the Constitution is rejected by the DA and what part of the Constitution is wants to be changed by the EFF. And the interesting thing is the EFF is not saying what is there, it won't implement. It's saying what is there, it rejects, but it wants to change the Constitution in order to have its way. And I prefer that way than to just do your own way, regardless of what the Constitution says.
Well, it is for some of the reasons you've alluded to that the EFF says it cannot form part of any arrangement that includes the DA.
Where the EFF is just being disingenuous there. It has been working with the DA in various coalitions. At this stage, the ANC, as I understand it, is not even asking for a coalition. It's asking for a government of national unity, which is a little bit more loose than a coalition arrangement. For example, in the GNU, not everyone has to come to the executive. The other parties may all stay in parliament to strengthen the accountability, and it may well be that it's the ANC only that is in the cabinet. So this idea that says you don't want to be part of a core determination of the future of South Africa, if it includes a section of the population, is unhelpful. In any event, the majority of white people voted the DA. Are you then going to say you don't want a party that represents white South Africa to be at the table to determine our collective future?
Of course, I mean, we have the disadvantage of not knowing who is insisting on what, because these conversations are being held in secret. But the ANC president did promise that whatever deal is entered into, it will be made public.
And that would be fantastic, but I would love that the ANC and the parties have the confidence and audacity to tell us what are they demanding. We don't want to hear only when there's a deal. We want, as it happened in the multi-party talks that led to the democracy elections of 1994 and the 1993 Constitution plus 1996 Constitution, everything to be in the open. What are people afraid of? If they're demanding something that is consistent with the Constitution, let them tell us.
You said this is very interesting because, I mean, from last week, you know, the ANC said it it has these media briefings. It also they allowed us to form part of the closing address of their president at their NEC meeting. And the reason they're doing that, they said it's precisely to avoid a situation where people listen to rumors and untruths and so on. But they haven't really been open, even though they claim that they are doing that. I mean, if you read today's newspapers, there are so many versions of what exactly is going on.
Well, it would be improper of the ANC to disclose what the other parties are demanding. I think it should be up to each party to take us as the public into its confidence regarding what is it demanding and why. From my side as a social justice activist and as somebody who's been in the struggle since I was 13, I think that the Constitution should be at the center of whatever is asked for. And if you saw my article today in the Sunday Times, I'm suggesting that we craft a second deal. Our first deal, as Mandela said, was it gave us freedom not to be oppressed. And what was the nature of that freedom? It's simply legal freedom, which means nobody can be oppressed by the power of the law. Nobody can express you by invoking the law. It also gave us political freedom, but nothing more. Economic freedom was not clearly discussed in the deal that led to the 1994 elections. And social freedom is tied up with economic freedom. So the second deal should deal squarely with what are we going to do with the land. The 1995 estimation was that by 2000, we would have redistributed 30%. We haven't even done that, but that was an interim target. So we haven't said what is an ideal situation. Is it proper that 72% of the land in this country is owned by a group that is less than 10% of the population? Is it proper? I don't think so.
Doesn't that then point to the danger of pandering to investors, investor friendliness? Because these people wield a lot of power, but they're not addressing those issues that you're raising. Isn't there an inherent danger then in the conversations that are taking place?
There is an inherent danger in taking one factor. Society is a system, the world is a system, and in a system, there are multiple factors that determine the character of that system, its strengths and its weaknesses. So investor friendliness must not be ignored, but it shouldn't be the single factor. Also, considering that in the modern world, you no longer have those investors that are there for the long haul. They are jumping around. For example, these people that are saying we should tie ourselves to investor sentiments, do they know that during COVID-19, when we all had our knees, we were all on our knees, a lot of banks were writing to their customers and encouraging them to invest offshore. And this was a tragedy that in other countries, everyone was clubbing together, but some of the investors were only concerned about how do we make more money, and therefore we should go offshore. So yes, we have to consider investor sentiment, but we can't be tied up to that only. And again, in the Sunday Times article, I talk about maybe going back to those Montflair scenarios, 4 of them. And I think we sort of stuck in the lame duck one. We're really not sure what kind of society we're building. The Constitution is clear that we're building a social democracy, and I see the social democracy being something that looks more like a diamond. There are a few at the top, there are a few at the bottom, but nobody is poor, and there's a lot in the middle. But the way we do things, we have followed what Moeletsi Mbeki refers to as the Washington Consensus, and also Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Peace laureate economist, also says that was the Washington Consensus, where you go to the old model that has never worked, trickle-down economies. So we need to make up our mind. Are we going to do this growth and development as concurrently being implemented, which was the idea behind the RDP. Or are we going to go back to these tied and tired trickle-down economies, which will never work when you're dealing with a transitional economy that was deliberately made in an equal society?
If you just joined us, we're in conversation with former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela, who today penned a piece urging the ANC against seeking a coalition partner based solely on how investor-friendly that partner may be. Now, there's a group of political parties, small political parties, your BOSAs, your UDMs, your ATMs, who are saying the conversation should be broadened in the spirit of national unity.
Well, it's my understanding that the ANC is talking to everyone. Of course, I don't have the inside information, but in the public domain is that the ANC is talking to everyone. So I would agree with the smaller parties that, yes, they should talk to everyone. But in terms of representation in structures, of course, they would have to look at those who have significant representation, because modern democracy is participatory, but also representative democracy. So it makes sense to give more voice or more power to those with higher representation numbers.
Well, the ANC did say that it wants to talk to everybody, but so far they have confirmed the DA, the EFF, Patriotic Alliance, and the IFP. And it is for that reason, in part, that these other small parties then wrote a letter to the Chief Justice asking him to convene a meeting that will be that will include everybody.
Well, I think I understand their concerns if the ANC has not contacted them, but nothing stops them from contacting the ANC and saying, we want to talk. I think involving the Chief Justice in the negotiations themselves is premature. His powers in terms of the Constitution are to chair the National Assembly meeting at which the president is going to be elected.
Well, Muslim Maimane, whom I had here on the program on Friday, said part of the reason they are calling for inclusivity, but also someone like the Chief Justice to be the mediator, is because the ANC wants to dictate terms, or will end up dictating terms.
Well, I can understand their concerns. They must also understand that as voters, we've already dictated terms. We have given the ANC 40%. We have given the DA 22%. The MK was given 15%, and the EFF was given 9-point-something%. So obviously, we have to be honest about the interests of society is expressed through the vote. When we say to people, the vote is your voice, we mean it. And political parties can't then decide that it will be the Chief Justice who decides these matters. If they want him to mediate, I think they should talk to the ANC and say, and everyone else, and say, we like the invitation that we all be part of this, deciding the content of our agenda going forward. But would it be proper that we ask the Chief Justice to chair that? But maybe instead of the Chief Justice, they could, with the consent of everyone, ask for a retired Chief Justice rather than a sitting Chief Justice to convene rather than to mediate this matter.
Well, there's of course also, the time issue, because that special sitting of Parliament is scheduled for next Monday. So there's not a great deal of time between now and then.
No, that makes sense. The Constitution says it should take place within 14 days. So it does make sense that it should take place as soon as possible. As to when do the talks for the government of national unity take place, it seems to me that there's consideration that the president could be elected in the meantime, and then the talks could proceed whilst we have a president who has been elected. Because if that doesn't happen, then this government remains in power in terms of Section 88 of the Constitution until this president is re-elected or another president is elected and assumes office.
Yeah. Do you think it may affect things if, as suggest, I mean, conversations continue beyond that special sitting? And I would say these parties agree that, you know, they would, I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa should be the president and still continue with the conversation after next Monday.
I think it would not change anything, because the way the elections have resulted is that everyone needs everyone. The ANC needs all or some of the other parties to govern. The other parties need the ANC to be able to govern, unless all of them can gang up against it. So I think there will be an element of good faith, because somehow at this stage, everyone needs everyone. From my side, as somebody who is always concerned about constitutional governance and accountability, I see a glimmer of light here, in that the one thing that can bind everyone now is the Constitution. So common ground can be achieved in just saying, do we all agree to the preamble? And I must say, my university, or my vice chancellor at Stellenbosch University, is adamant that the starting point is the preamble. That's why in front of our law school we have the preamble, because it clearly sets out what are we trying to build. We are trying to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, where every citizen's life is improved and every person's potential is free. If we can just agree on that as a starting point, then we go to Section 1. Do we agree that the value of achieving equality, which then presumes there isn't equality yet, is a value that we accept? The value of freedom, which is not just formal freedom, but substantive freedom, do we agree to it? Do we agree on the supremacy of the Constitution? And if we agree with the Constitutional Code, do we agree with the values that underpin Ubuntu, which includes the values of human solidarity beyond the equal worth of all human beings and interconnectedness of human? If we just agree on all of those things, then do we agree on the Bill of Rights? I think that would be enough, because we can then agree on what does it all mean, and Constitutional Court jurisprudence will provide some of the answers in terms of what does it all mean. Taking it back for you, I said, Nelson Mandela said, we are not yet equal. All we have acquired is the freedom not to be oppressed. And probably we could extend this to saying the freedom not to express each other, whether we are black or white, or women, men, disabled, non-disabled, national, non-national, rural, urban, suburb or township. So we have acquired the freedom not to be oppressed and not to oppress each other. But the freedoms we did not achieve is economic freedom for those who were oppressed and dispossessed under apartheid. Then we have to agree on how are we going to sort this out. Then the issue of markets. We have to say, to what extent do we factor in the need to be market friendly? And in that particular regard, I have suggested that we go back to these Montflair scenarios and take the scenario that was named the flight of the flamingos, which is a dual carriage approach, growth and redistribution being done concurrently, feeding into each other. Not saying growth first and then crumbs for others, or redistribution first and therefore we redistribute for poverty, but do these two concurrently.
I mean, from the little that we know, it doesn't seem like those conversations are even taking place at the moment.
Well, I'm not privy to what the conversations are. The only conversation I've been to is a women's conversation, which was organized by South African Women in Dialogue a few days ago. And that conversation was about it's important that we ensure that whatever way forward we adopt is not one that is misogynistic, that undermines gender equality or equality. Whatever path we take is one that is rooted in the Constitution in its entirety. And it's a path that it makes sure that women are included in all of the conversations and in all of the spaces. And it's a pathway that is about shared and inclusive economic growth. And when other people talk about shared prosperity, they really mean farms for others, because they talk about shared prosperity, but they say, oh, others will only get jobs. But even then, not jobs that are based on the minimum wage. They should forego their right to a minimum wage, which is not really additional jobs, which is basically job splitting. So women are saying, no, we want shared prosperity. And that shared prosperity include the SRD grant being made into a basic income grant. So this idea of saying, oh, you'll increase the child grant, you are then saying the child grant will feed the entire family if other people are unemployed, which will create more gender-based violence because everyone is fighting over the child grant. And that's why we're saying to these leaders, please use systems thinking. This country was designed by people who were systems thinkers. This country is not unequal out of accident. What happened after 1932, following the Carnegie Commission, was the designing of an unequal society, but the designing of a society that was aimed at ending white poverty. And indeed, white poverty was ended by 1971, but through the creation of inequality or the cementation of inequality. So we need to design a country now, not by pushing anybody off the board or impoverishing them further by denying them minimum wages. We need to design a more equal society by democratizing the economy. But I was being reminded by a TUMA ambassador earlier today that we must stop talking about building an economy. The Constitution says we must build a society. In other words, human well-being should be at the center of what these parties are talking about. And then when they have decided what should human well-being look like, then they should say, how should the economy be structured to support that human well-being?
Professor Madonsela, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Vuyo.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, who today, of course, penned a piece saying that if the ANC seeks a coalition, it shouldn't be based, that partner shouldn't be, or partners shouldn't be based solely on how investor-friendly the partner is. More